been here since the beginning. You founded this place. What can you tell us about how we got here?
Well, the first thing is, of course, I'm a co-founder. The other co-founder is my wife, Betsy. We raised our children in Virginia Beach. I went to school in Charlottesville and Lexington, and she went to school in Roanoke at Hollins. And we always wanted a place in the country. Our children went to camp outside of Lexington, so did I. And so this has always been sort of in our DNA. My father had always wanted a farm. His father actually lived on a farm in North Carolina in retirement. So I hired a real estate agent. And I said, find me a little farm in Albemarle County. He kept taking me to places that he said would be highly developed in the future and we could make a lot of money. And I said, well, can we go in an opposite direction? And went into the house, and as he drove up into Elk Hill, he said, aha, I think this is the place for the Agelasto family. And within less than a half an hour, I'd agreed to his terms. And we closed on signed a contract in November of '77. Between then and 2000, we were voting residents of Virginia Beach, but in 2000, I became a resident voting here in Nelson. So this marks 20 years of that. And I wanted to know as much as I could. We wanted to meet new people, and we started getting involved. And we got involved in the Nature Foundation. Actually, Doug Coleman was a volunteer and a part-time employee at the time, and we went on wonderful hikes with Doug and discovered the whole county and got more and more interested. And so, going forward, my wife and I have always been interested in gardening, nature, the environment, and particularly in history and culture. And so this desire to give back to our community led us to fighting a development in the Rockfish Valley where they wanted to zone for big boxes out in the field across from us. 400 people signed signatures against it, and it came up to the Board of Supervisors, and the developer knew it wasn't looking good, so they put the meeting on hold and had a conversation which ended up in their withdrawing their application. But during this lull, I was sitting next to a woman named Karen Firehawk. Karen knew of where we live on the river, of our interest, and she said, would you all be interested in a watershed forum? And we said, yeah. She says, I've got a grant that has to be given to an organization. I said, well, what's an organization? She said, 3 people. I was sitting next to Al Weed. And I said, Al Weed, what do you think? He said, yeah. And I said, we need a 3rd person. And he turns around and he looks, and here is a young woman named Carrie Whitehead. So we get up, we go outside while this other thing is just in suspension, and we create an organization without a name. We come back to Karen, and fast forward a little bit, we have a watershed forum at what was an empty shell at the time and is now the Rockfish Valley Community Center. There were about 100 people. It lasted 2 days. It was fabulous. Karen later became a big supporter and made a lot of things happen in Nelson and for Rockfish Valley Foundation. But she introduced our understanding to watersheds and what we as citizens should be doing. We founded the Friends of Rockfish Watershed. I'm sitting in the office of the foundation and I'm looking at 3 sets of cabinets, 8 cabinet drawers filled with the work of the Friends of Rockfish Watershed. We had fellows, we had interns, we had grants, we did studies of the rockfish, studies of the Tye River, we did TMDL work. It is an amazing resource. We finally ran out of energy and disbanded the organization. We had $2,300 in the bank. We gave that money to the 6th grade ecology club at Nelson Middle School for them to do their rain garden project, Mary Haynes Johnson. So we've been involved in community growth and work. But how did we grow? The first thing, obviously, was the Watershed Forum. After the Watershed Forum work, I decided that I wanted to do some things with this land. I wanted to fence the cattle out of the streams, have alternative water sources. There's something called the Thomas Jefferson Planning District, which Nelson is part of, with offices in Charlottesville. And I said, do you all have maps? Can you all educate me more about my property? And I went in there and I was shuttled off to a young man whose name was Chris Genzig. And before you knew it, he and I had come up with the idea of, well, if we put these fences here, we can have some trails between the water and the fences and have people make use of them. And I said, well, why don't I hire you? And why don't you and I create a project?
Peter, what about the work on the rockfish?
Well, Bruce, that's a really good question, because it's one of those serendipity things. A lot of what's happened under the Rockfish Valley Foundation is purely serendipity. A man stood up, and his name was John McLean, and he said, I am in the environmental section, which to some of us sounded a little strange. I'm in the environmental section of VDOT. We got a $100 million project that has been stopped, and until we come up with a remediation, a mitigation, because we have ended the flow of 2 streams there, the project is stopped. So I'm here to ask, is there anybody who's got a stream that they want some work done on? He didn't explain what work meant. I basically jumped up and went over and sat in his lap to say, how about the South Fork of the Rockfish? That was in the year 2000. The project first leg, first effort, was finished in 2005.
We suddenly have the Thomas Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District, and we have the USDA, and we have a contractor doing fencing that I have hired, and alternative water sources, and the cows. And so everything is changing in front of our eyes. And the more I looked at it, and the more I understood about this project of stream remediation, restoration, and the budget that was going with it, and the time and energy of 10 state and federal agencies making it an education program, this thing went so well that the finished product was recognized by the Garden Club of Virginia as one of the top environmental projects in the state. And you can walk the stream downstream from the Camille Trailhead and see how beautiful those little ponds are. And just think about if we can get the trees planted on the side to lower the temperature of the river and get the trout to spawn. We're working with DGIF that was part of this project. We're working with the Monticello Fish Hatchery. We're working with DOF that's doing a stream buffer project now. All of these things working towards protecting the South Fork of the Rockfish. And Mike Hazlett had done a written report on the bog that we have over on the trails. And Mike was kind of moving around with different jobs, and I think he was at Virginia Tech at the time, and had him quoted as being very interested in creating something called the Master Naturalist program that existed in states like Texas and Georgia, but not yet in Virginia. I said, can we have a chapter in Nelson? She said, sure. You'll be, I think we were going to be the 9th or the 10th. She'd established a group of chapters. And she gave me a little education, and I said, I think that's when the word capacity first came into my mind as a challenge. How do you do it? And Michael LaChance and I had been working on so many things, the Rockfish Valley Foundation things, and I called Michael, who was head of extension, and I said, do you think we ought to try to have a chapter in Nelson? And he said, absolutely. We talked to people at the Nature Foundation, and we started having meetings up at the Nature Foundation to see if we could get a group together to pull this thing off. I think it was about that time when we were having the meetings to see could we really pull it off, that a woman walked into Michael's office by the name of Charlotte Ray. She got into the mix of our meetings, and before we had the chapter created, she'd put in about 500 hours.
Wow.
Doing the things that Michael and I wouldn't have been good doing. All the paperwork, all of the organization. We were happy to talk and just be involved, but Charlotte made it happen. I felt that the Master Naturalist chapter, the Central Blue Ridge, was going to be a major source of volunteers for the Rockfish Valley Foundation and its Natural History Center. I still think it is a major source. Whether it's Earth Day or trying to get capacity built or making the Natural History Center volunteer system work, we have been blessed by those master naturalists. And it all incubated just because of an article in a newspaper and a conversation that Michael and I had. Where is that going in the future? I can't really speak to that, but it's a wonderful partner of Rockfish Valley Foundation.